Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have some stories from rural Japan that I'm sure you're going to love. I'm joined by my friend Jay Nightmares, who has narrated 2 of tonight's stories. Don't forget to subscribe for even more new stories every week. Check out our app for over 5,000 stories and no ads. And our friend Jay Nightmares. You can find a link to his channel in the description and on screen at the end of the video. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened roughly 30 years ago, and it's something that I've only told a few select people about until now. It happened one night when me and my girlfriend at the time drove to the beach. After work I went to pick her up and we headed straight there. However, when we arrived, the beach was already pitch dark. I mean, we should have known better not to go so late, but for some reason we both really wanted to go that night after work, and it was roughly 10 PM by the time we left the car. We were talking in the car eating our McDonald's. We had stopped on the way to look out into the darkness. At least we could see the waves rolling against the beach. That was worth the drive, I suppose. I told my girlfriend that I couldn't stay too long because I had work early in the morning, but she didn't respond. I thought that she might have been annoyed at me for saying I had to leave so soon. I looked over at her and noticed that she seemed to be transfixed on something at sea. "What is it?" I asked her. She didn't answer, so I looked in the direction she was looking and saw a strong beam of light swaying across the waves far from the shoreline. "Is that a squid fishing boat or something?" I said to her. "That's not a squid fishing boat, the light's not right. You don't think it's getting closer, do you?" I looked out at sea and agreed the bright light was definitely approaching. It was shaking as it moved along the waves, and it appeared to be heading right for the shore. Maybe it's a fireball. Fireballs, a will-o-wisp-like paranormal phenomena in Japan, visually a little orb-like thing. The balls of fire appear at night and are said to be the souls of those who've been separated from their earthbound bodies. If it was a fireball, then it wouldn't shine so brightly now. Surely that's a UFO. She said it excitedly. I was kind of taken aback. I didn't know until that point that she had an interest in the paranormal or the occult. I looked at the mysterious light a little closer, and she was right. It wasn't a flickering kind of dim light that you might expect to see when you think of a fireball. It was a strong, bright searchlight shining down at the waves. I heard myself absent-mindedly agreeing with her by saying, "Yeah, guess it could be a UFO." At that point, it was only about 200 to 300 meters away from us. That might sound a little strange, so let me just say the beach that we drove to was a very secluded one. The shore wasn't that far away from where you would park. We liked the beach because there was never anyone around at night, and there wasn't much light in the area. It was perfect for a nice secluded evening date. As the light of what we thought was a UFO approached, I noted that I wasn't scared. I just thought to myself, wow, this could be a UFO. It's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of deal. My girlfriend then said, "Hey, isn't the light getting to the shoreline now?" It sure was. I snapped out of the state of awe and began to panic. I saw the light go over the waves at the shore and knew it was about to illuminate the sand on the beach next. The gravity of the situation set in for me. "Put your seatbelt on, we gotta get out of here." I started the ignition and pulled a U-turn and drove out of the beach at breakneck speed. As I drove, my girlfriend continued to stare at the light. I heard her call out in a frightened voice, "The light's right on where we were parked." I was really panicking and I was driving for our lives. I felt like a rally driver at one point and drifted out onto the sand. Finally, we made it back onto the road, which was well lit, and the sense of security we lost down by the shore slowly returned to us. I pulled over and I remember I had goosebumps all over my arms, and when I took my hands off the steering wheel, I noticed that they were drenched in sweat. We spent the rest of the journey in a hushed silence. I think neither of us knew what to say to comfort the other. If she was anything like me, she was replaying it over and over in her head. That weird overhead light advancing on us was coming straight for us. I dropped her off at her place, and when I got back to mine, I just laid down on my bed. I was there wondering if what had happened truly happened or if it was some kind of dream. I met my girlfriend the following day and asked her outright. "That wasn't a dream, wasn't it?" "Of course not. I was there with you," she replied. She seemed a little skeptical that day. I don't know how to describe it. "I do wonder what that was," she would ask rhetorically. Last night she had been so sure it was a UFO, but now she was questioning herself, it seemed. Of course, I didn't know what it was myself, so I didn't have an answer for her. Well, that's where it sort of ended, I guess. One thing I can tell you is I ended up marrying that girlfriend, and 20 years on from that night at the beach, the memory of that strange bright overhead searchlight has faded away. But one evening we watched a TV show about Japanese national abduction cases. For those unaware, there are a large number of missing person cases which are tied to North Korea. About 470 people have been abducted according to the Japanese government as of November 2021, and abduction cannot be ruled out for a further 873 individuals. And during this TV show they showed a map which had all the locations where they believed that the abductees were captured and kidnapped. What did we see on that map? Well, none other than the secluded beach we drove to that night 20-something years ago. I looked at my wife and she was staring stunned at the TV. We didn't encounter a UFO that night. We likely encountered a North Korean ship coming to shore. They could have easily seen us pull in and park up. I felt a chill race down my spine when I realized that we could have ended up as victims if I didn't drive off when I did, and could have easily have been taken. Since that day, whenever North Korea appears on the news, I think to myself how lucky I am to live the peaceful life I now have with my wife. The realization that it wasn't a UFO, but people with evil intentions, was hands down the scariest moment of my life. This is an experience I had when I stayed with my family in a guest house way out in the mountains. My daughter was quite young when this happened. I think she was about 4. My husband and I had thought that we had put her down for the night and she was asleep, but we were wrong. We were in the living room area of the guest house, and I guess that was just after midnight, when our daughter came rushing out of her bedroom over to us. "What's wrong? Do you need the bathroom?" I asked. She shook her head. I remember she looked a little shaken up. It was a rare look for a girl her age. She then said, "No, Mummy. The lady outside said, 'Can you let me in? But I can't reach the lock on the window. Can you do it for me?'" I sat there staring at her, completely unable to understand what she had just said. We were, literally, in the middle of nowhere. We drove miles and miles to get to this log cabin, and there wasn't another residence anywhere nearby. I didn't know how to approach this topic with my daughter. I didn't want to call her a liar for having a bad dream, so before my husband could open his mouth, I simply asked, "Who said that to you, darling?" As soon as the words left my mouth, concern inside me began to flower and bloom. My question to my daughter boomed repeatedly in my head. "Who said that to you?" My daughter seemed to sense my distress, and I will be honest with you, I don't think I hid my concern very well. I must have looked racked with emotion. "The lady with the hurt head outside the window. She was banging and banging on the glass, Mama." I shot a glance over to my husband, and we jumped to our feet and marched straight into the room that my daughter was sleeping in. I went to turn the light on, but my husband stopped me. He said if there was someone out there, then we would be able to see them outside if the light was off. I saw something against the window. I know I did. There was this white shadow, like a mist or smoke. It looked like the rough outline of a person, and then it was gone. It dissipated. My husband asked us to wait inside with the door locked while he went out to check the situation. My daughter then said, "The lady was sad, Mama. She looked so hurt, and it looked like she had horns too." I was frightened, very frightened at the idea that there might be someone out there trying to persuade my child to let them in, and equally frightened that I might have just encountered something supernatural. My husband returned from checking outside. He didn't see anyone out there or footprints either. I mean, there is gravel around the whole building. Surely we would have heard them run off, right? But we didn't. I went by the door while he was standing there and held my daughter's hand tightly as I approached. The door was open and my husband went to close it, but I stopped him. I wanted one good look out there. All I could see was a dark sea of trees. The tree line was about 20 feet from the cabin, and all I could think was that the tree line could be hiding something. The bugs chirped and the wind blew, and it was at that point I shut the door. If someone needed help, like my daughter said, surely they would come back when the door was wide open. We all slept in the same bed that night, and thankfully nothing else suspicious happened after that. I will say that I was completely on edge until we left that cabin. It was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I wonder who the hurt-horned lady was, and why she wanted my daughter to let her in. I heard this from a close friend of mine. He is an avid hiker and loves the outdoor life, and we often go mountain climbing and camping together. I will switch into first person and tell you about his experience as if it were my own. I had wanted to climb a very snowy mountain in my region in a party of 5. We researched the climb and figured it would take us 3 days and 2 nights to get to the summit and back down. The first day of the climb was difficult. The temperature was below freezing and the terrain was very rocky. We ended up expending a lot of our energy. It got dark at 4 p.m. that day, making progress difficult, and we pushed on through and managed to set up base camp, and we pitched our tents. We made it to a flat area which was kind of like a field, with fresh covered snow covering everything, and all we could see was black and white, and the sky was being black and the ground snow white. It didn't take me too long to drop off to sleep, despite the fact I was shivering in my sleeping bag. I did, however, wake up in the middle of the night and heard a voice outside my tent. I was groggy, and I almost thought it was morning, but I couldn't see any light. I thought it could just have been one of the people I was hiking with. I lay there, static in the dark, trying to get back to sleep, and then I heard the voice again. Hey, hey. I was very confused at that point because to me that voice didn't sound like it belonged to anyone in our group, and there was just another off-putting thing. The voice sounded like it was coming from the direction we had just climbed up. The voice was coming from the descent, if you know what I mean. I checked my watch and it was past 2 a.m. I wondered if someone had been injured, another hiker perhaps, so I woke up our whole party, we lit our lanterns and turned on our flashlights, and we called out in the direction we heard the voice from. Anyone out there? Are you hurt? We called out, but the only response we received was the howl of the wind rustling through the trees and the gentle sound of snowfall. It was as if, the moment I had called out, the voice had stopped calling. I didn't hear it again that night, but it played on my mind, and I slept very lightly, as if there was an ever-tightening knot of concern in my stomach. It was weird, but we had to move on. I supposed I must have been hearing things. You can hear all sorts of strange noises out in the wild. It could have been anything. Well, that was what I thought at the time. That's what I tried to convince myself of. However, I knew deep down it sounded way too human for me to mistake it as an animal. The following day we continued our climb and covered a lot of ground. We crossed several peaks and pitched our tents again when the sun began to descend. We were in a prime position to aim for the summit in the morning. I got myself ready for sleep, hoping to catch a few extra hours which I missed out on the night before. I ended up waking up again though. This time it was because I needed to take a whiz. I got up and headed out of the tent into the freezing cold to find a place to relieve myself. It was pitch black, but the blanket of snow at my feet allowed me to at least see where I was going. The moon was pretty full and it was just jutting out from behind the summit of a mountain. I stopped to look at it, and it was then that I noticed something. I tried my best to get a good look, but it was difficult. The snow was obscuring my view, but there was definitely something out there near the summit. It looked like there was a light flickering in the distance, maybe the light of a lantern or a fire. I decided to call out and shouted, "Hey!" The light then disappeared, as if in reaction. But then something different happened. I heard voices coming from that direction, their calls carried on the wind. "Hey, hey!" I shouted back. "Hey, you okay? Do you need any help? Is anyone out there?" I did so because it sounded like the same voice I'd heard the night before. The voice never answered. I couldn't consider it a coincidence anymore. All I could do was head back to my tent and get back into my sleeping bag. Something was trying to call me, I know it was. It was trying to separate me from my party. The mountains are scary, but thankfully nothing much else happened. We climbed the summit and made it back down without any further issue. While I was up there, I did look for any signs of fires or lanterns, but couldn't find anything. I do wonder what was calling me though, and what might have happened if I went in search of the owner of that voice. This happened roughly 2 years ago. It was summer and early night, and the only thing that was unexpected that night was the light fall of the rain. I was proud of my car. I used to love taking it out on long drives. I didn't really care where I went as long as there was an open road ahead of me. I liked going out on weekday nights as there was less traffic that way. I loved the mountain roads on the weekdays as they were great for drifting, and I was getting into that. I put a lot of money into my car and it was tuned out to the max. I was with a friend and he was driving too. Before we got anywhere near the mountains, I felt as if something was kind of off. There was a weird vibe, put it down to the unexpected rain in the summer. One of my friends had said that he wanted to go further into the woods that night. I guess I did too, since I was kind of bored of drifting around the same curves. I smiled at the beware of animal signs, thinking that we were invincible. I guess that's how it is when you're young. You just have something about you, don't you? I had seen animals crossing the dark roads at night, so the signs weren't intimidating to me. I saw 3 animals that night actually. Nothing that impressive or frightening. A weasel, a big bird, and a tanuki. One of my friends swore that once he saw an animal with a glowing white body one night. I just laughed it off. I'd never seen anything like that. There were no streetlights in the mountains and there was nothing but darkness. I guess he had just witnessed an optical illusion. We kept on driving. It got later and later. I mean, we always headed out late, but it was almost 3 a.m. and we weren't heading back home. I'd had enough, to be honest, plus I was running low on gas and didn't feel like wasting it driving around and around in the middle of nowhere. I turned around and put my hazards on, and I sent a friend a message to let him know I was leaving. I sat there messing with my phone, expecting my friend to reply. He seemed to be taking his time though. I thought to myself, screw this, I'm tired. I figured my friend would understand if I took off early, and I meant we were in constant communication with each other. I gave him to the end of my smoke. I lit it up, cracked the window a little, and the rainfall on the roof of the car was quite nice. It wasn't heavy, but it was light enough for me to stand out there and smoke a cigarette without it going out. It was at this point I heard a strange noise. There was a faint wailing sound. It was quiet, but it was definitely there. It wasn't as loud as the rain, but I could still hear it all the same. I knew that some animals could make calls that sounded almost human. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal, but I couldn't. With each passing second, the realization sunk in. It sounded more and more like someone crying. I remember sitting there, the smell of tobacco, the drum of the rain, and the sound of the windscreen wipers going back and forth. I had the key to the ignition in my hand. I wanted to go, but something inside me told me I shouldn't. The sobbing sounded louder. There was something new now, a new sound. I paused the windscreen wipers so that I could listen a little closer, and it sounded as if there was a child wailing. The crying I heard before was undoubtedly the cry of a woman, and now there appeared to be a baby in the mix. The road was slippery, but I felt as if I should pull away. I really hated the sound of that sobbing woman. But I knew deep down in my heart there wouldn't be a woman and child out there in the middle of nowhere late at night. I just knew it. So I say this with a clean conscience. I got the hell out of there. It wasn't until about a month later I heard a woman and her son had been taken and their life ended there by her husband, the boy's father. What a dark thing to do. Apparently, their bodies had only just been discovered. It had been out there in the heat of the summer and the cold of the rain and wind for some time. I don't know if it was their residual voices that I heard that night, but all I care about is if their souls are at peace. This happened when 4 friends and I were camping one night. A typhoon was approaching Japan. The weather forecast had stated that it wasn't on course for our campsite, but it had changed direction, so we were forced to check into a guest house. It wasn't raining, but our tents wouldn't be able to withstand the strong typhoon winds. We approached a guest house, and the building was magnificent, and we were welcomed by the cheerful owners. It was great. They guided us to our room, which was opposite the hotel's banquet hall. We don't often use this room, but it might be a little noisy tonight, the owner said in a hushed voice. I'm sorry. I hope it doesn't ruin your stay with us. My friend and I went into our room and settled down. We ate and drank some of the food and alcohol we packed for our trip, and we could hear some noise from next door. The party in the banquet hall never got as loud as we were led to believe it might, and I decided to have a look around the guest house since it was a really nice place. I walked past the banquet hall and noticed something. The lights were off. I could tell by looking under the door. I could hear voices murmur in there. I went back to our room and told my friends about what I'd heard. They followed me and stood outside the banquet hall and listened. They could hear it too. Ha! Maybe there are ghosts in there, one of my friends said. We weren't scared, but the more we drank, the more curious we became. Later, one of my friends knocked on the wall of the banquet hall and asked, "Did someone die here?" And then, a huge bang answered on the door. We assumed this indicated yes. "Should we light an incense stick for you?" one of my friends asked out loud. And another bang was heard. "How many should we light? How many of you are there?" It was silent for a moment. Then we heard multiple bangs. We froze in fear. I can't remember anything after that. I guess I could blame it on the alcohol. But I woke up in bed. I got up and ran out of the room and into the hallway. The owner's wife was walking towards me in this beautiful kimono. She had a huge bundle of incense sticks in her hand. She paused and smiled, and then said to me, "You heard it then?" I nodded. She told me that a long time ago there was a terrible typhoon which claimed many victims in the village. They had to use the banquet hall as a makeshift morgue until help arrived, and that now and then they make contact with the guests, and that they must have liked us.
My hobby is sleeping in my car. I like to do it on days before public holidays. I don't want people to see me. Usually if they do, they just report me to the police, and the police just usually want me to move on. If it's not the police, then it's the youngsters. They peer into my car windows. This makes choosing a perfect spot all that much more difficult. It was around summer of last year. It was late at night, and I was just driving around trying to find a decent place to sleep. I was on a mountain road, and I saw a turning for what looked like a disused building. The old rusty sign told me that this used to be an observatory. I saw a truck in the car park. He must be taking a rest too, I thought as I pulled in. Perfect. There was another truck in the car park too. I parked away from the trucks, in the middle of the car park. I pulled out my phone and played with it until I became sleepy. I then put the seat all the way back and pulled my blanket over me and fell asleep out in the elements. I woke up during the night because my throat was dry. I went to grab my drink from my bag, and just as I did, I heard a small stone or something strike the back of my car, the rear windshield. I looked in my rear view mirror, and there was nothing there. I guessed it might have been a bug or something. It's not uncommon. I took a drink and I went back to sleeping. The second time I woke up was because I really needed the restroom. I looked at my phone, 4:27. I got out of the car. I kind of hoped that the abandoned observatory had a toilet, but it didn't. I didn't want to climb over a fence and wander around in the middle of the night in there to find another one either, so I found a spot out of the way and relieved myself. As I was doing so, I heard one of the truck doors open and shut. Someone else was awake. As I came back to my car, I saw him stood there. He looked to be about my age. He wore glasses. "You couldn't sleep last night, right, huh? Were you scared or something?" I looked at him a bit puzzled and asked, "What do you mean?" "Huh, you didn't notice then." I was a bit spooked by his response. He began to elaborate. He said that he was watching a DVD when I pulled into the parking area. He thought that it was a bit odd since truckers almost exclusively use this place to park up and take a rest. When the DVD was finished, he looked up and noticed a woman stood in front of my car with her hands on the hood. He said that seeing this freaked him out. He took his eyes off the woman for just a second, and when he looked back, she was at my driver's side window. He said that when she noticed him looking her way, she ducked down by the side of my car. He kept checking on me after a while, but he couldn't see the woman anymore. He then went to sleep in the back of his truck after checking. All his doors were locked. I thought he was just trying to freak me out, so I questioned him. He said that if I didn't believe him, then I should go check my window for handprints, as she had her hands cupped against the glass when she came by the side of my car. He came with me to check my window to see if there would be handprints there. There wasn't any. I thought at this point, it might have been a kind of thing that truckers did to make sure us non-truckers didn't use their parking spots or something. But then we went to check the hood, and there was something there. A small pair of indentations at the front of the car. I was pissed. I heard the trucker then shout, "Hey, there's something worse round the back, buddy." There were scratches and another little indentation, as if something had struck it. I heard the door of the truck open and close, and an older man came over. He said that he had seen her before. "She's been here before. She did the same thing to me my first night here. I thought that she was just after some company, but she never said a word. She just stared. I asked a local about her in a bar down that road there. Turns out she does it all the time, but only to newcomers at the parking lot. It's fine though. She won't hurt you." I looked at the other truck driver in shock, and I hightailed it out of there. I couldn't handle it. Knowing how dark and isolated we were in that location was enough for me. For someone to arrive on foot, out in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night, just to mess with me? Nope. I had to go.
This happened over a year ago. I remember that I left my family home just before lunchtime to head off to my part-time job. I always walked to work. I was saving for a car at the time, but the walk wasn't exactly a long one. It was a pretty dull one though. I grew up in a pretty rural place, and there were fields and fields as far as the eye could see. The houses in my area were all spaced out and sparse too, which meant there wasn't a whole lot of passing traffic. It was perpetually quiet. There wasn't ever much to look at on my commute by foot. Like I say, fields, a few houses, and there was a small cemetery along the way. On the day that this took place, there were no people on the streets and no passing cars. It was a really quiet day, and I didn't at all feel that with it either. Something was off. It was like I was constantly being absent-minded. I think I was a little overtired because the shift I had had the night before was pretty hard, as far as part-time work goes anyway. I was lazily marching my way to work, not thinking about anything in particular, and that's when I noticed something. Someone was behind me. Well, I felt as if there was someone directly behind me. I don't know when this person began to tell me because I hadn't been paying attention. I will have to explain a little about my commute at this stage for the next part of my experience to make sense. The road that I walked along to work was in a straight line. That straight line runs through the middle of all those open fields I spoke to you about, and most importantly, My journey along the straight line pretty much begins the moment I set foot outside my door. So there were no houses, buildings, winding roads, hidden lanes, alleys, or anything for someone to emerge from to join me on my walk without me noticing it. What I mean to say is everything was visible. If there was someone in the field or a mile away, I would have seen them coming in pretty much any direction. So how I ended up with someone tailing me without me realizing was something highly unusual to begin with. While I continued walking, I wondered how long this person had been following me for. When I thought about it a bit more, I realized the guy behind us was now closing the gap between us. Whoever was behind was now speeding up. Before I even looked behind me, I thought it might be a male. His footsteps were getting faster, so I decided to try and attempt to sly look over my shoulder to see who I was dealing with. However, when I looked back behind me, I noticed there was no one there. That's crazy. I stopped and turned around so that I could look back, and the strangest thing happened. I felt as if someone was staring at me, but there was also no one in sight. I knew something was looking at me. I could sense it. Some innate part of me knew that I wasn't alone. Something was there with me. I just couldn't perceive it. I immediately thought that I needed to get out of there and fast. I turned to leave, but my body resisted. I don't know if it was due to the shock, surprise, or fear, but I couldn't move a muscle. My back then felt cold. The chills I felt weren't limited to my back though. It was like an ill wind was flowing through me. I don't expect anyone to understand what I'm about to say next, but this is the best way I can describe it. It was like my internal organs were cold. It was like hands were rummaging around my insides and wrapping cold fingers around my beating heart. I felt that I needed to get out of there and fast. Something was seriously wrong. I thought that if I didn't figure out how I could get out of there, something bad would happen. But in the end, I couldn't move. It was like an unseen person was holding me in place. I could almost feel arms around my neck. It felt disgusting. Then, without warning, I was released. I sprinted as fast as I could from the scene. It took place while periodically looking behind me as I ran. I headed to my part-time job, and all the while the weird sensation I felt around my neck did not subside. My neck was feeling very uncomfortable. I tried not to think about it. I tried to chant this sutra healing chant in my head while I walked. When I got home, I had some medicine, but the pain didn't subside, and after I had some of my lunch, I ended up throwing up in the bathroom. I finished work, and by the evening, when my day of work was done, I still didn't feel any better. I had no appetite, so I went to bed without eating, and didn't sleep well either. After an hour or two of light sleep, I woke up and vomited again. I was really concerned about my health for a while there, but after about a week I managed to return to normal. I was really relieved. I was worried about myself. I didn't know what I could do. I have walked along that road many times since that day, but never encountered that same thing again. I have thought about it a little more, and maybe what I experienced was some kind of spirit passing through. It definitely feels like the whole thing was paranormal. I mean, I'm no expert, and if anyone knows what that thing might have been, and if I should be worried, or should have done something else, then I'm all ears. This happened when I was in university when I was driving home from a trip. The roads were very dark and I was in the countryside. The mountains and trees were blotting out the moonlight, and all of a sudden my engine began to splutter and slow until it eventually came to a stop. I'm not the best with cars, so rather than waste my time guessing, I figured I'd call roadside rescue, as it was included within my insurance. There was nothing much I could do except wait for someone to arrive. It was creepy out there. The forests are home to strange noises at night, and after a little while a bright light lit up the road, and it was aimed at my car. I thought that roadside rescue was early, and I couldn't believe my luck. But when the light got a little closer, I realized it wasn't them at all. It was strange. It didn't look like the lights of a normal headlight. It stopped about 50 meters in front of my car and then didn't move. I was getting a bit weirded out now. Unlike standard headlights, which are divided into two light sources, whatever was in front of me only had one. That light was so bright it didn't seem safe at all. It seemed not to have the same purpose as a light bulb. I didn't like it, and then I saw 3 people approaching from behind the light. These people were very thin and tall, at least 6'6". As they moved behind the light in front of it, I could see the lines in their faces. They were very gaunt and long. There was something off-putting about the 3 people that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then I realized what it was. It was their style of clothes and hair. They looked like they were from another time. It was like they had been wearing the same clothes since the 70s. They approached my car and one of them spoke to me. Once again, I noticed something slightly off-putting about the people. When they spoke, it had all the wrong intonations. He was emphasizing the wrong syllables, and I'm not sure how to explain it exactly, but it wasn't right. It made listening to him difficult, yet I detected no accent to indicate they're a foreign. "Where did you come from?" he asked. I chose to remain silent before answering that I didn't want to let these strangers know about my car's engine trouble, because if I did, I wouldn't be able to get away with them. "You have a trouble with your car and I can fix it," he said. It scared me that he knew that. I said thanks, but no thanks. I'd already called roadside rescue. The man was persistent and I kept refusing. I didn't really want to speak to these guys out here in the woods alone. Then, the strangest thing happened. My thoughts felt like they were changing, like I had to mentally wrestle with myself to not allow them to work on my car. It felt like my mind was being changed for me. I started to wonder if maybe they could help. Maybe it would be a good idea to unlock the door and let them in. I got out of my car, half of my mind screaming, and the other half imploring me to get back into the car and lock the doors. I couldn't fight it. It felt like I should go with these men, go where they wanted me to go. I started following them towards the light. Like a moth to the flame, I was transfixed. I didn't need to think for myself. I tried to raise my arm, but I couldn't because I wasn't in control of it any longer. I wanted to be scared, but this calm voice inside my head reassured me that there was nothing to fear. That part of me was still screaming at me to do anything to get away from these men, but my internal voices were getting quieter and quieter. While I was walking towards that bright light, my phone started to ring. It must have been the roadside rescue people because it snapped me back to reality and I was in control again. I was able to answer the phone. I was back. I knew that I needed the phone to be on. Something about that call saved me. I must have explained my location in about 10 different ways to the rescue people, as I really wanted to be accurate and I didn't want to be out here anymore. While I was on the phone, the men were trying to get me to take up their offer for help. I hated the way they towered over me, and their faces were so pale and thin like barn owls, but I refused. I ran back to my car with the phone clamped to the side of my head, and that was when they began to get angry. They were screaming and shouting by the side of my door. I began to doubt myself. Usually I would never refuse a kind favor, as I would be willing to do the same for someone in my situation. But given what just happened, I knew I couldn't trust them. They were trying to express anger, but it was like the concept was new to them. Eventually they gave up and headed back towards the beam of light. Before leaving, they did this weird thing simultaneously in front of my car. They placed an open palm on their forehead and then slapped it, as if you're high-fiving your own head. Their fingers were long and spider-like. I didn't have a clue what the gesture was supposed to mean. The light then shot backwards at tremendous speed and was then gone. Shortly after, the roadside rescue team showed up, and the guy went to check the engine and couldn't find a single fault with it. He put my keys back in the ignition, turned it, and my engine started. What really freaked me out is that I know the engine stopped. I hated it, but I needed to get out of the woods. I headed in the direction of the light and managed to get home without further incident. However, when I woke up the next day, I had a very strange rash all over my body. I went to a dermatologist and she couldn't figure out what had caused it. After 10 days or so, it went away with the cream and ointment I got from her. I'm sure the rash was related to the bright light and those 3 men. Well, I say men. I'm not even sure they were that. 2 years after this happened, I was at a party and a woman said that she was driving in the mountains in the same area as I, with her boyfriend, and they saw something similar to what I had. She said that on 2 occasions she saw beams of light flying across the night sky. Some people sniggered, but I didn't. It felt all too real. Did we have an encounter with something that wasn't of this world? There was this abandoned factory in my hometown. It used to be a milk factory. One of my friends went in there once and told me there were a ton of adult magazines in there, and it was really popular in my friend's circle. It's like the abandoned factory was ours, you know. This all happened when I was in high school. After school one day, I went with 2 friends to see the abandoned factory myself, and to be honest, I guess we were less interested in the factory itself and more on getting our hands on those magazines. When we arrived, we found a treasure trove of materials. There were videos as well as magazines. They were all lying on the ground just outside the factory. We decided that we would look over the place. The window frames were rotten and the glass was smashed. We found a way in. It wasn't much of a gap, and it would only fit one of us at a time, but we had our way in. We wanted to look around more and see if there were other magazines. The ones we found were fine, but some which didn't have pages stuck together would have been even better. We got in and were strolling around on the ground floor. It was a really big place. One of my friends realized he needed to go home and do some errands, and my other friend said he wanted to leave with him. I didn't want to leave without checking upstairs, as I was sure I was going to find more treasure. So I went to the stairs by myself. There was broken glass and dust all over the stairs, and I could tell that no one had climbed these stairs for a while. Upstairs there were a ton of doors, and most of them didn't even open. I felt kind of bummed out. Someone must have locked them all. Then I walked a little further down the hall and found a room which was open. I pushed the door open to reveal countless dead pigeons all over the floor. It was seriously weird. In that room I noticed there was a hole in one of the walls, like a few of the bricks had been removed. I went over to have a look. I didn't really know why I didn't turn back. I guess I had gone far enough in the treasure hunt that I couldn't be stopped. My heart was beating in my chest, and I felt excited that I might be about to discover something that all the kids in my school would be envious of. I looked in the hole, and there was nothing but bones, long bones like the one of the skeleton in science class. They looked large enough to belong to a human. That was enough to frighten me and persuade me to end the treasure hunt, and I ran for it. Something deep down told me to get the hell out as quickly as possible, and I shattered all the glass on the stairs as I ran, and when I got home I was too afraid to tell my parents what had happened for fear of being in trouble for looking at the magazines. When night fell and I was laying in my bed, my brain tormented me with the possibilities, and I saw those bones every time I tried to sleep. It was very stressful. The next day at school I told my friends about what had happened, and they didn't believe me. So I went back to the factory again and showed them what I'd seen. Being accused of lying is way scarier than some old bones in the factory. And we climbed the stairs and got to the room at the end of the hall and opened the door. All the pigeons were gone, and I was shocked and immediately went back to the room where the hole was and discovered the bones were gone as well. I remember getting upset because my friends didn't believe me, but in the end I think I convinced them. This was the first strange and creepy thing that had happened to me. It was really unexplainable. Where were the bones and pigeon corpses? After this event, the abandoned factory stood there for about half a year before it was torn down. It still feels very mysterious to me, but now that I'm older and I have time to think about it, I think that someone was living there. Maybe the glass on the stairs was their way of knowing if anyone was coming or going. For all I know, whoever brought those bones there could have been in one of those locked rooms I tried, and that thought sent a shiver up my spine. I'm so glad my gut feeling told me to get out of there, and I'm glad I listened to it. I went through a period not too long ago of going out on late night jogs. I used to go out running at night, but then I ended up for one reason or another heading out later and later. I don't know why, but I really enjoyed the feeling of being out and about while everyone else was home tucked up in bed. I felt proud of myself. I live in a rural area, so the street lights were few and far between along the way. There were a few points where it would be really dark, but I enjoyed it. I'm not sure if it gave me a rush or not, but I wasn't afraid. I should probably mention that I am a man who lives in a rather quiet and safe area. This happened when I was running through my area one night at around midnight. I had just turned off the road which leads into a country lane. I liked that route because I got to run alongside an irrigation canal. It was nice to hear the water flowing below and the croak and chirp of the wild animals that lived within it. The irrigation canal ran alongside a bunch of rice fields. It was an open field area which made me feel free to be out there at night. I was slowly jogging my usual route, and then I saw something that surprised me. I wasn't alone that night. I sensed a presence up ahead, and by that, I mean I saw two vague shapes in the darkness. These two shapes seemed to be standing right beside the irrigation canal. As I drew a couple of meters closer, I was still about 12 meters away when I realized that those shapes belonged to people. Because it was dark and there weren't many streetlights, I had a hard trouble making out the faces of the people by the canal. I knew instinctively that they were older people, maybe it was due to the way they were standing or something, and I thought they looked a bit like a couple. I thought the pair of them must have liked taking a late night walk like me. I had seen others do it, so it wasn't that uncommon. Thinking that it wasn't anything to worry about, I had no issue continuing my jog past them. I took a glancing look over to them and realized they were doing something strange. I heard them talking as I approached. I had brought my pace down because I suddenly became curious as to what they were up to. I heard the old couple say, "Oh, you're doing so well, keep on trying, come on." They seemed to be happily chatting with one another as they were looking into the canal. The odd thing was in fact that it was pitch black down there. I ran past that canal a bunch of times and never saw the water on a night as dark as this one. I didn't know what they were doing, but I knew that it was something unusual. It felt weird, so I sped up and passed them. They must have heard me coming, but it didn't put them off whatever they were doing, and I heard them calling out into the darkness of the canal after I passed too. They seemed determined with their praise to whatever they were doing. I completed my jog that night and went home, showered and went to sleep. Just before sleeping, I wondered and wondered what they were looking at in the dark down there in the canal. And before I knew it, I must have drifted off. It played on my mind the next few days, and I couldn't stop thinking about what the two old people could have been up to that late. So I went back. I decided to head on an early morning jog instead of a late one as usual. I wanted to check out the area where I saw the old people. I approached through the usual route I took and slowed down at the bend that I saw the old couple. I went to the edge of the irrigation canal and peered in purely out of curiosity. I didn't expect to see what I saw, but there were 6 dolls in the canal and all of their limbs had been removed. Those limbs were floating in the boggy water around them. Judging by how dirty those dolls looked, I imagined that they must have been there for a long time. What were the old couple doing talking to the dolls? For what reason and why? Were they demented in some way? As you can imagine, I have a lot more questions than those you just heard me ask myself, but alas, I have no answers. I ended up changing my nightly jogging route just in case. It was a creepy experience, even though it probably doesn't sound that creepy to some.
This happened a few years ago, and it's taken me a while to feel like talking about it. This might be a slightly longer than usual story, but here I go. About 4 or 5 years ago, my friend and I, who were college students at the time, we decided to go to an all-girl college. There was a festival and we wanted to meet some women in our area. Seemed like a good idea at the time. We thought that it would be easy to meet some girls our age, but somehow we seemed to neglect the fact that we weren't all that interesting, or handsome, or even approachable. Well, it didn't really go to plan, but not all hope was lost. I knew that in some of the classrooms at this university there would be students selling snacks and drinks. That's how they made money for the festival, you see. So I thought that I could get some one-on-one time with whoever was selling that stuff. And my friend, of course. We walked the halls of their college and we were waving at the ladies, and man, some of them smiled my way. I even exchanged a number with a lady. She took some convincing, but she gave up her digits in the end. It was a pretty productive day, so my friend and I decided to head out. We were smiling as we were heading towards the entrance. But that smile was short-lived, as it looked like there was an increased security presence at the gates. We were both kind of shocked. I wondered if one of the girls we had waved at complained about us. I hope not. We weren't there to upset anyone. There were more teachers and security people than there had been in the morning. Well, rather than risk any kind of repercussion for our actions, we decided to slink out of the back of the school. I hoped that there might be some kind of unlocked gate back there that we could make a move through. But thinking back on it now, it wasn't the best idea at all. Although what we were doing wasn't exactly sweet, I doubt we would have been in all that much trouble for being there. It was a public event, anyone could go. All we had to do was walk out through the gate we came in through. But we didn't. We found a gate at the back of the college campus. The only thing was that it was locked. We decided to climb over it since we couldn't go through it. I felt for sure that we were going to be caught at that point. Somehow we made it out, and it seemed like we went undetected too. When we both climbed down from the gate, we came out into a residential area. It was a built-up area, suburbs. We knew that if we kept going in the direction that we were heading in, we would probably arrive back at the train station we hopped off at earlier. We walked on for a while, making small talk. We spoke about the girls we had minor exchanges with, and our overall impressions of the day, but after a while the small talk kinda dried up. Not because my friend and I ran out of things to talk about, but because something weird was going on. I realized that there were no people around. In a place that was so dense in homes, and with so many cars lining the streets, I found it incredibly hard to believe that we hadn't seen a single person as we walked along. It was weird. Not even a bus, taxi, car, or bike passed us by. It seemed like a very quiet area on a very, very quiet day. I guessed that it was so quiet because it was a Sunday. I looked over at my friend and I feel as if he was thinking the same thoughts as me. It looked like he had noticed how quiet it was there. We both continued walking, pretending that nothing was out of the ordinary. We walked for a few minutes and then I was suddenly struck by a sharp feeling of anxiety. I felt as if someone was looking at me. I felt it from behind. I'm not that great with intuition or anything like that, so I didn't know what my gut was trying to tell me. I took a quick look over at my friend again. I was hoping it was just me being paranoid, but when I caught eyes with him, I realized that he was feeling what I was feeling too, and we exchanged some nervous glances. He asked me, "Are you feeling like something's behind us?" "Yeah. I don't know, but maybe there is something following us. Don't look back." "I don't know, man. Maybe we should speed up a little, just in case. We started walking faster, and I noticed a couple of things about the area while we walked. The first thing I noticed was the residential area we were walking through was going on far too long. On our way to the college, it felt like it took half of the time we had been walking so far. The other thing was the fact that even though it felt like something, and I stressed the word something, was behind us, I still felt it was strange that we hadn't seen a single person on the streets. The houses started to all look the same. It was very eerie. I looked up at one of the windows in one of the houses we passed by, and I saw something moving. When I saw something in that window, my first reaction was something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm glad there's people here." But when I focused on what was moving, I realized that something was wrong. I saw a pale hand waving at us. I looked at the next window, and there was another pale hand waving. I could see slightly more of the arm this time. I looked across the street, and through kitchen blinds, I saw pale hands waving at me and my friend. It got to a point where every window we passed had a pale hand waving. In different degrees of excitement and pace, some waved slowly, some waved erratically, and some seemed to wave suggestively. You could almost tell what the owners of those hands might look like just by the way they were moving. It was strangely enticing. We walked past a parked car on the other side of the road, and a hand was waving from the backseat window. It was so strange and unusual that it was downright disturbing, and I really didn't like it. I spoke sharply under my breath and asked my friend if he was seeing what I was seeing. He didn't answer, so I looked over at his face, and to me, in that moment, it looked like he was on the verge of tears. Behind him, I could see a blur of pale hands waving from windows. I asked him an important question. "Can you run?" I watched as he slowly nodded, his head up and down. He seemed scared to speak. Those waving hands were really scary, but so was the feeling of whatever was still behind us. It was still coming. I broke out into a jog, or maybe it was more like a sprint. Whatever it was, I started running, and so did my friend. I don't know how long we were running for, but my friend started to run out of gas a little. I was in the track and field club, and I wasn't a bad runner back then, but my friend was, I don't know how a nice way to say this is, but let's just say he was more of an indoors type of gentleman. He was clutching at his sides and complaining. I think he couldn't physically go on any further. He was wheezing and spluttering, kinda sounded like he was gonna hurl, too. He dropped to his knees and yelled, "Go on without me." It was like a line from an action film. It was honestly so weird that day. He yelled at me, "I'll catch up to you as soon as I can," and I don't know why, but I started running. Normally I wouldn't allow myself to leave anyone behind, especially under those circumstances, but I ran. I regret this choice. Maybe I should have at least attempted to carry him on my back, although saying that, I'm not sure how far the pair of us would have got. I felt guilty for leaving him behind, but I ran and I ran and I ran. I gradually realized that the more I ran, the less I felt like something was pursuing me. It felt as if the presence behind me had disappeared. Then I felt as if I was back in the real world. There was nothing behind me, and life just seemed to look a little bit more normal than it had been a few moments ago. I ended up in a public park, and I almost collapsed through exhaustion. There were people in the park, and that made me feel incredibly relieved. They all seemed concerned for me. In the park I was in, I heard the splashing of water. I don't know why, but I brought myself to my feet, and I went in search of that sound. I didn't have to go far though, because in the middle of this park was a lake, river or pond, I'm not sure which one, but it was a body of water. In that body of water, I saw my friend. The one who I had been with earlier. There was just no way in hell that he could be here after I had left him back there. I didn't really allow that thought to occupy too much of my brain space, because I was just so incredibly pleased to see him. I started yelling out his name at the top of my lungs, and I waded into the water to embrace him. I was so glad that he wasn't going to be left behind with all those pale, waving hands. My friend's face was expressionless though. As soon as I entered the water, he dove down and went for my legs. He took my legs out from under me, and I was submerged in the murky water. He was wrestling with me and twisting and turning with me under the water. I don't know what had gotten into him, but it was like he was trying to drown me or something. I kicked him away, and he fell on his back. And then he came out of the water with his arms raised, outright poised to choke me. In the end, some bystanders, I guess, separated us, and we found ourselves in the backs of police cars. I don't know what the hell happened to us that day, but I have a feeling that we were somehow spiked at that all-girls college. If we didn't go out the entrance, then maybe our night could have ended a lot more differently than a wrestle in a pond in a park. All those weird things we saw, those feelings of paranoia, it was also terrifying. So real, and oh man, I can still see those waving hands in my mind. I don't even look at the windows in buildings as I pass them anymore, for fear of seeing a pale hand waving back at me. Whatever that place was, I really don't want to go back there. I have no idea what it all meant, or if it's supposed to mean anything at all, but all I can say is, I'm glad that my friend and I got out of wherever we were, or whatever minor trip we were on.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I would like to extend a huge thank you to J Nightmares for not only providing the stories, but also narrating 2 of them to make this video possible. I know a lot of you guys really enjoy the Japan stories, and if you do, that is pretty much all that he does over at J Nightmares. So if that is something that interests you, feel free on giving a click over to the link in the description or on screen shortly. Huge thanks as always to my members and patrons as well, whose names can be seen on screen. For signing up, you get a bunch of cool perks. If you want to find out what those are, you can follow the link to do just that. But until then, stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one.